Death, Divorce, and Disappointment, Part 2. It looks a lot like home to me. Richard got sick in June of 1942, a few weeks before Mama's birthday. His symptoms were mild at first, and because his mother had survived the same disease as a young child and had immunity, he remained at home rather than being isolated in a polio ward. Quarantine signs were placed on each door and along the white picket fence that surrounded their yard. Their big black letters were a wall Mama couldn't climb, keeping her from Richard when he needed her most. Even though she couldn't have a real visit, Mama rode her bike to Richard's house every day. Standing just on the other side of the quarantine signs, she'd call out his name. Those first few days, he'd call back through his bedroom window, left open for just this purpose. They'd talk for a few minutes, pretending everything was right with the world, even when they knew it wasn't. Then, with a promise to return the next day, she'd say goodbye and ride that mile-long straight line back to her house. Richard was a strong, handsome boy, 2 years older and 4 inches taller than Mama. Being the tallest girl in town, already 5 foot 8 inches, she liked having to look up when he stood next to her. But now, when they talked across his yard, with him in bed as she stood next to the fence, he sounded weaker and smaller with every day that passed. She could feel him leaving her just like Daddy and Dickie Lee had done. Then one day when he didn't answer Mama's call, his mother came out and said Richard had taken a turn for the worse in the middle of the night. Things didn't look good. She stood all alone on that porch, holding her lace handkerchief over her eyes. Mama wanted to go to her, cry with her, and make it all a little easier to bear. Instead, all she could do was get on her bike and cry all the way back home. Then, just 3 days later, on August 14th, 1 month after her 15th birthday, the knock came at their door. Mama didn't have to ask. She just stood there frozen as Granny answered. Richard was gone. It'd be weeks before she could visit his family. Homes under quarantine had to be thoroughly cleaned and disinfected before receiving visitors again. When that day finally came, she left her bicycle at home, choosing instead to walk that mile down the sidewalk that used to be hers and his. She walked in silence, the sound of cicadas buzzing in the early September heat, her heart heavier than she ever thought it could be. Mama spent most of the afternoon sitting on Richard's porch with his mother. They held each other and cried. Hardly any need to talk. Tears were more than enough. Richard wasn't just her best friend or the first boy she loved. He was proof that not everything in life had to be painful. Until now. She thought she could never hurt that deep again, not after Dickie Lee and Daddy. But on a hot September day in 1942, Mama discovered a whole new kind of heartbreak, and now she'd have to mend it on her own. In the space of 4 short years, she lost everything that really mattered. Hardening parts of her heart she didn't even know existed, teaching her how to carry grief like a shadow that never lifted. This loss changed her forever. Anger and resentment welled up inside her heart where she once held only love for her daddy, for Dickie Lee, and for Richard. Life had taught her a valuable lesson. If God actually existed, he didn't exist to love her like her church had said. He existed to make her life miserable. She didn't talk about it much, but her anger simmered just beneath the surface. Every time she heard a hymn or saw someone bow their head in prayer, it threw salt on a wound that would not heal. If God was real, and he loved her like the preacher said he did, then Daddy'd be living at home with Mama, and they'd both be watching her and Richard ride down the sidewalk with Dickie Lee. Sometimes she'd close her eyes and imagine her daddy's laugh ringing out over the hum of her bike tires, Richard grinning next to her, and Dickie Lee's baby giggles dancing on the breeze. And there'd be no war, not in Europe or any other place. Not if God was real. But that world was make-believe. The only way she could reconcile her losses and the state of the world that she lived in was to make a decision. God is nothing but a big fat lie. And that's what she did. In her anger, she couldn't see that her rejection of God was the first step on a path that would lead her somewhere she never expected to go. It'd take a miracle and another 20 years for Mama to change her mind, but right now, that was something she couldn't even begin to imagine. Right now, God was dead to her. Her mama's God wasn't loving or kind, and my mama had just about enough of him for one lifetime. She's done. He had disappointed her for the last time. I guess you could say Mama was shunning God. Believing in God, however, wasn't a choice in Mama's house. It was a requirement, so she never told anybody. This was her secret. She and God would be the only ones to know she didn't believe in him anymore. Even though her secret was weighty, she was happy to bear it. This was the only thing that was hers alone, something no one could take away. Pretending nothing had changed, she went on with life. It wasn't easy, but keeping her secret safe felt like a small victory when Granny would start harping at her, arms crossed and eyes narrowed, saying, "Quit moping around, Darlene. You don't know what real troubles are." That's Mama's name, Darlene, spelled with an E at the end and an I in the middle. Her daddy did that. I guess you could say spelling, among other things, was not his strong suit. I suppose it was easier for my granny to think that her daughter couldn't know real heartache at such a young age. But that's not true. Sometimes the worst heartbreak of all happens when you're just a kid. You feel it strong and deep, and you don't know what to do with it. So it just sinks down into the dark spaces where it goes to hide, waiting for the day when it creeps back up to the surface right when you least expect it. Mama's heartbreak wasn't something you could see, but it sure left its mark. Psychologists say that an adolescent's experience of trauma and its effect on their brain can make what appears to be a minor incident an earth-shattering event. Clearly, what happened to my mama was not minor. But when her world came apart, Granny, like many people in the 1940s, had no understanding of how to measure that pain for its true worth. Most everybody mushed it down into something more manageable. They really didn't know what else to do. In 2008, Mama shared a poem with me that she wrote right after Dickie Lee died. It was my first glimpse of what she'd gone through 70 years earlier as a heartbroken 12-year-old girl. Mama died in 2018, and that gave her 10 years to tell me a few more stories of her life in Iowa. I was always enthralled by her recollections, and now I'd give anything to have her here to tell me a few more. I guess I need to be satisfied that I've got this little poem. When I first read it, I was taken aback by how much pain a 12-year-old could hold in her heart, wrapped up in simple words and bows of bias tape. My 12-year-old mama ended her poem like this. All afternoon I colored old newspapers till they were full of Santas and elves and snowmen too. When that was all done, each gift I wrapped and tied with a beautiful bias tape bow. I'll always remember, I know with tears, but maybe someday a smile. Christmas of '39, for 'twas the only one we ever had, with our sweet Dickie Lee, blessed child. In her heartbreak, Mama found a way to hold on to the good parts, even if they were tied up with sadness, something I've tried to learn from her as well. Reading those words, I felt closer to Mama than I ever had before, like she was still speaking to me across the decades, sharing a part of herself she'd never said out loud. The terror and trauma, the death and disappointment, everything Mama and Daddy experienced, things I never knew about till I was grown, resonate in my life like a bell that won't stop ringing. Knowing a little about their story and feeling some of their pain and humiliation helped put my childhood in perspective that makes a whole lot more sense now. It doesn't make the way they treated me or how I was raised any easier to look at, but I suppose that's not the goal, is it? It does, however, give me a lens to look through, and believe it or not, that's the same lens I looked through on January 6th. That perspective allowed for a much greater degree of compassion than I might otherwise have employed when confronted with the kind of foolhardy misbehavior we witnessed that day. No excuses, though. I was as shocked as anybody, and we're all adults here. We got to take responsibility for our choices. But it does help clear the fog, and to some degree, at least for me, it levels the playing field a little bit. I mean, I don't know anybody that doesn't have some kind of trauma in their past that they're trying to work through or maybe just ignore. My experience, however, is that you just can't run fast enough to get away from whatever's chasing you down. When religious fundamentalism and the conviction that you are doing the work of God is woven into the trauma that led you to believe you have no voice or real power to change things, and then you empower a man like our 45th president to make those very same folks believe he's the only one who can give them a voice, you are going to get January 6th. The January 6th moments in my own life were not unlike that. I swept up in a tide of righteous certainty, only to realize later how fear had guided my steps. Oh, they played out on a much smaller scale, with far fewer witnesses, and thank the baby Jesus, they were not broadcast on national television or streamed live on social media. They were, however, exhibited on the stage of my life, and I always had plenty of company there. We were people with similar fears and anxieties gathering around a common purpose that was too hard to ignore. Looking back, those moments taught me how easy it is to mistake fear for righteousness, and how dangerous it can be when you let one guide the other. Thankfully, to my knowledge, no federal laws were broken during my January 6 moments. Lucky me. Embarrassed and humiliated for sure, but no need to contact the FBI. And there it is. Get enough fear-filled folks together in the same place and offer them a big enough lie that feeds the monster rattling in their secret past, and what do you get? You get something that looks a lot like January 6th. Most of the time, you get it in unknown places with unknown faces on unknown stages. Unfortunately, on January 6, 2021, that was not the case. We got to watch it play out on the biggest stage of them all, and it looked a lot like home to me.